Oldsmobile Toronado Second Generation, 1971 to 1978. With heavily revised styling from the first generation, the Toronado transitioned from a GT-style car into a more traditional luxury car. It was now more similar to the Cadillac Eldorado than the Buick Riviera, which would be redesigned in 1974, then again in 1977, with styling taking several cues from the 1967-70 Eldorado. Sales increased dramatically. Front disc brakes became standard. The front end utilized a novel air induction system, splitting the airflow from below the headlights, in a bottom breather fashion. When United States federal bumper standards were implemented, the front air intake was phased out for a conventional approach from below the bumper. All overall dimensions of the 1971 Toronado were larger than previous models, with wheelbase increased from 119 to 122 in, 3,100 mm, only 2 in, 51 mm, less than the full-size Delta 88. Also, the subframe design of first-generation Toronados was replaced by a separate body-on-frame similar to full-size Delta 88 and 98 models. The front torsion bar suspension was retained, but the multi-leaf springs in the rear were replaced by coil springs. In addition, the Toronado introduced as a novelty what later became a federal mandate in a modified form, 2 high-mounted taillights above the trunk and below the rear window, which was shared on its platform twin the Riviera. These taillights mirrored brake and turn functions of the normal taillights, but not the nighttime taillights. A rear wheel ABS became optional. The 455 cubic inch, 7.46 liters, rocket V8 was carried over from previous models as the standard Toronado engine. The introduction of the second-generation Toronado coincided with the implementation of a GM corporate edict that took effect with the 1971 models. All engines had to run on lower-octane regular leaded, low-lead or unleaded gasoline to meet increasing more stringent federal, and California, emission control regulations, a goal that was reached by reducing compression ratios. This was a first step toward the introduction of catalytic converters in 1975, which mandated the use of unleaded fuel. The 1971 Toronado's 455 cubic inch V8, 7.46 liters, was rated at 350 horsepower, 260 kilowatts, down from 375 in 1970, with a compression ratio of 8.5 to 1, down from 10.5 to 1 in 1970. For 1972, the advertised rating for the 455 engine dropped to 250 horsepower, 190 kilowatts, thanks to a switch in power measurements from the gross ratings, in which power was measured by a dynamometer with no accessories attached, to net ratings, which were measured as installed in a vehicle with all accessories and emissions equipment attached. By 1976, the last year for the 455 engine in the Toronado, the net rating dropped to 215 horsepower, 160 kilowatts. The 1971 to 78 generation is mainly noted for the early use of 2 safety features that are now standard on all cars in the United States, the aforementioned high-mounted taillights, although a somewhat similar feature had appeared briefly as an option on the Ford Thunderbird in the late 1960s, and from 1974 through 1976, the Toronado was part of GM's first experimental production run of driver and passenger side airbags, which GM named the air cushion restraint system. These Toronados used a unique steering wheel and were fitted with a knee blocker beneath the driver's portion of the dashboard. Styling. Engineering highlights through the years included disc brakes with audible wear indicators for 1972, a federally mandated 5 miles per hour, 8 kilometers per hour, front bumper along with new vertical taillights in 1973, a stand-up hood ornament, 5 miles per hour rear bumper and optional fixed rear side upper windows in 1974, and rectangular headlights in 1975. The 1973 Toronado went on sale in September 1972 and has a combined fuel economy of between 8.5 and 10.9 miles per gallon. The 1975 through 1978 Toronados had a fuel tank that could hold 26 gallons of gasoline, Whereas the 1973 Toronado had a 25.9-gallon capacity fuel tank with 250 horsepower and an axle ratio of 2.73 to 1. The 1973 Toronado was made from September 1972 to September 1973. During most of the Toronado's second-generation run, 2 interior trims were generally offered each year. The standard interior trim consisted of a choice of cloth or vinyl upholstery and a custom sport notchback bench seat with center armrest. An optional Brougham interior available in cloth, velour or vinyl trims included cut pile carpeting, door-mounted courtesy lighting and a split 60/40 bench seat with armrest. From 1971 to 1973, the Toronado's command center wraparound instrument panel was similar to other full-sized Oldsmobiles, featuring a large squared speedometer directly in front of the driver, heating, air conditioning and lights, wipers switches on the left-hand side and the radio controls and cigar lighter on the right-hand side. From 1974 to 1978, a flat instrument panel, again shared with Delta 88 and 98 models, was used that featured a horizontal sweep speedometer flanked by a message center of warning lights, fuel gauge and shift quadrant, with the other controls in the same locations as in previous years. As befitting a luxury car, Toronados featured a long list of standard equipment that included turbo-hydramatic transmission, variable ratio power steering, power front disc brakes along with an electric clock, carpeting and deluxe wheel covers. Virtually all Toronados were sold loaded with extra cost options including air conditioning, AM/FM stereo with 8-track tape player, power trunk release, vinyl roof, tilt and telescopic steering wheel, cruise control, power windows, power door locks and 6-way power seats. Power windows became standard equipment in 1975. A new feature in 1974 was a gauge that monitored if the driver was driving economically or not, called the fuel economy gauge, which was a vacuum pressure gauge that would determine if the accelerator pedal was being pushed too hard. The later years of this generation of Toronado saw new features mostly confined to minor styling tweaks to the grille and trim, although in 1977, the XS and XSR models debuted. Both featured a 3-sided, hot wire bent glass rear window and, on the XSR, electric T-tops which slid inwards at the touch of a button. However, as built in prototype form, the XSR had no means of channeling water away from the retractable sections, and water would inevitably leak into the cabin. No workable solution to the problem was found, and as such, the XSR model was scrapped. The XS, which did enter production, was offered with GM's more reliable, and no doubt more leak-resistant, Astro roof sliding sunroof instead. Air conditioning was standard. The running factory XSR prototype was documented as restored by Collectible Automobile magazine in the late 1990s. Also for 1977, the 455 cubic inches, 7.46 liters, V8 was replaced by a smaller 403 cubic inches, 6.60 liters, engine, rated at 185 horsepower/325 pounds-feet, due mainly to forthcoming government corporate average fuel economy standards, implemented beginning with the 1978 model year. In addition, the 1977 Delta 88 and 98 models, formerly the biggest cars in the Oldsmobile stable, were downsized. For 2 more model years, the Toronado would be the largest Oldsmobile, and, after the mid-sized Cutlass line's downsizing for 1978, the Toronado looked hopelessly out of place in the lineup, given the industry-wide shift to smaller cars. Also in 1977, when Buick removed the Riviera from the E-body lineup and reassigned it to the B-body LeSabre body shell, this meant that all E-bodies would be front-wheel drive only. This generation was probably helped in the sales race by the radical and controversial bow tail design of the contemporary Buick Riviera, since during this period the Toronado outsold its Buick cousin for the first time. However, the higher-priced Cadillac Eldorado managed to outsell the Toronado in most of these years.